There are only 3 days left for Congress to pass a spending bill to keep the government from shutting down. The Senate reached a deal on a stopgap spending bill that, if passed, would keep the government funded until November 17th, while House Speaker McCarthy continues negotiations for his 4 full-year spending bills. The Senate's bill includes more than $6 billion in aid to Ukraine, which McCarthy has spoken out against. Meanwhile, McCarthy finally got the vote to bring his bills to the House floor for a debate. Our next guest has been at the negotiation table in Congress and is here to share his insight. Let's bring in former Senator from North Dakota, Byron Dorgan. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So, as someone who's been in the room in these sorts of situations, when you look at what some of these GOP holdouts are asking for, how close are they to even averting a government shutdown, or how long do you think this might persist, given how far apart they are?
Well, it doesn't seem to me they're close at all. I mean, we have, particularly in the U.S. House, we've got a few loudmouths that care very much about trying to find a way to shut down the government. I mean, it's very bizarre. There's a kind of a profound ignorance here about what this means to the American people, what it means to good government. And so, in the past, we had a Newt Gingrich shutdown some decades ago, and I was one of the negotiators that was selected to negotiate and went to the White House almost every day during that period. And I can tell you, it's once the government is shut down, it's very hard to find a way to negotiate and get it back. It's, I mean, ultimately it'll happen, but this is not a good thing for the American people to watch. The Speaker does not control the House of Representatives any longer. And the Senate, it looks like it has done something that if they send it to the House and the House would pass it, would give us another 4 or 5 weeks, but then we'd be right back into it again. So my wish is that Congress would begin to behave in a way that it used to behave, do the right thing, compromise. The lubrication of democracy has always been compromise. That's what they should do.
Byron, I wonder if you can speak to that. As somebody who has been at the negotiating table before with that clock ticking on a government shutdown, how is this current political environment different? And how much optimism do you put, given that we could, in fact, avert a shutdown?
Well, the current political system is different than anything I've ever known. And it has to do with Donald Trump. It has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with more tribal politics, people more caring about the political party they belong to than the question of the larger government issues. I really wish that we would see, both in the House and the U.S. Senate, people care a great deal more about good government than their political party. But that has not been the case. And so my best guess is, and I don't know this for sure, but my best guess is it appears at the end of this week, we'll have another government shutdown. And the American people do not respect that which brings the government down. They respect smart and good men and women in the Congress who would work together and find the right kind of compromises to move forward.
And Byron, we know in these situations there always does tend to be the blame game. We saw Speaker McCarthy said that a government shutdown would not be on House Republicans, but there was a morning consult poll of voters. 34% of them said Republicans in Congress would be mostly to blame for a government shutdown. 23% would blame President Biden. 21% would blame Democrats in Congress. So it seems, at least for the voting public, there'll be enough blame to go around. What is the incentive then for some of these GOP holdouts to keep this up?
Well, there are no winners with respect to the shutdown of a government at all. And there will be blame cast all around. But there are some people who have come to the Congress who have said, you know what, we don't like what's going on, and we're willing to shut the government down if necessary. And so some have boasted about being willing to do that. I think that's nothing to boast about. The American people deserve much, much better than they're getting, and particularly from the U.S. House. And I mentioned I shouldn't probably use the term loudmouth, but there are a few loudmouths in the U.S. House these days that are very different than the ones that I and many others have served with over decades.
This naturally begs the question, why are we back here where we are? We were talking yesterday about just how many government shutdowns there have been. There is some movement within Congress to potentially sort of change that. One bill that's being introduced here automatically provides continued appropriations if spending bills don't get enacted. There are a number of others that have been introduced as well. I mean, is it time to seriously consider something along those lines so that we're not back here a few months from now, a year from now?
Well, much of this is about spending, as you know, and so we'll see. I mean, there has to be appropriations bills passed in both the House and the Senate and signed by the president. That represents the process by which the government has the funds to do what it needs to do. So we'll see. But I just, again, there are people in the U.S. House. There's about 36 of them in the Freedom Caucus, maybe 4, who don't mind at all if there's a shutdown. They think it makes their case, whatever their case is these days. And I think the American people really have lost a great deal of respect for the politics of the Congress, and especially the politics in the U.S. House. The Speaker does not control the House these days. You remember he had, I think, 15 votes to become Speaker. So, he has a difficult situation as well, but he's making it more difficult by the kinds of things he's doing and by the leadership he's portrayed.
And Byron, I do want to ask you, when you were negotiating, that was a 3-week shutdown. You were negotiating with then Speaker Newt Gingrich during the Clinton administration. Now, that was a 3-week shutdown. Given how much the economy has changed, what sort of repercussions can we expect when we try and get something back up and running when you have an economy as complex as this and as fast moving as this?
Well, that was a 3-week shutdown, and we spent a great deal of time trying to think through and work through how do you put this back up. But this is a complicated system that we have these days. Things have become even more complicated, and my best hope is that if there is a shutdown, that it can be relatively brief. But I wouldn't expect that to be the case, given the fact that there's a completely different kind of politics in the U.S. House and in the U.S. Senate. The Senate is different these days. You've seen Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer come together. Republicans and Democrats in the Senate come together, at least in this circumstance, for, I think, a 5-week extension of a continuing resolution. So the Senate is behaving in a way that it should behave just to try to get this done. The House is not doing that. And that has to do with the fact that there's precious little leadership there. And I wish that were not the case, but it is. And I worry very much that if this shutdown exists, that we're going to be in a situation that's going to take a great deal of time to try to work through and find the compromises necessary to put it back up.
Well, the clock's certainly ticking. We've got that shutdown watch on our screen there with just 3 days to go until that deadline. Former Senator Byron Dorgan, it's good to talk to you today. Appreciate the time.
Thanks a lot. Nice to visit.